Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start talking about the situation on the ground, before we start discussions, the clashes and the reports of Ministry of Defense, first I would like to talk with you about the redeployment, strategical redeployment that Ukrainians have completed during the previous few days. And first we're going to start with Rehov bridgehead with Zaporozhye area, and we're going to talk about Petykhatki bridgehead. The Ukrainians have completely moved the forces of 128th Brigade in the vicinity of Petykhatki. The entire brigade currently is located there, and the Ukrainians will reduce this brigade till zero, but they will try to capture these settlements like Petykhatki, Zherebyanki and Lugovo. Furthermore, according to the deployment map, the Ukrainians moved the 118th Mechanized Brigade closer to Orehov, and basically they have replaced the forces of 65th Brigade on the combat line. And when talking about the 65th, this brigade was moved closer to Kamyansk and Petykhatki bridgehead as well. So basically, and probably these forces will support the 128th Brigade in their mission to establish control over this territory. Furthermore, the deployment maps tell us that the Ukrainians have redeployed the brigade from Kharkiv front line, the 3rd Operational Brigade Spartan National Guard, closer to Orehov front line, and to be more precise, the forces of that brigade took positions behind 47th Mechanized Brigade that's still located in the vicinity of Mala Takmachka. And that's it about Orehov bridgehead. Now we're going to move a little bit to the east in direction of Gulyai Polye. We got a lot of updates from this bridgehead as well. The Western deployment map made some adjustments in the disposition of forces, and those adjustments concerns, for example, 3rd Tank Brigade. Basically, that brigade was moved from Novomykolaivka, that located on the east from Gulyai Polye, to another Novomykolaivka that located a little bit further to the east-north of the original Novomykolaivka. Furthermore, the Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 67th Mechanized Brigade to Gulyai Polye front line. If you remember, this brigade, according to information we've moved in the vicinity of Kremenaya Forest. In this area, this is the 67th Mechanized Brigade, because the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous days there were very fierce fightings, especially with forces of that brigade. But the Western deployment map shows that this brigade was moved closer to Gulyai Polye. To be more precise, that brigade was redeployed in the vicinity of Pershetravneva. This is the original position of that brigade. Furthermore, according to the deployment map, the Ukrainians have completely redeployed also forces of 23rd Mechanized Brigade right in front of that 67th Brigade. But now we see that there is some kind of misunderstanding, mismatch of the data between the deployment map and the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, and I'm talking about 67th Mechanized Brigade. But the deployment map have added this update as well, and basically the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of 67th Mechanized Brigade was left in Kremenaya Forest. And basically, when the Russians were saying about the fierce fightings with 67th Mechanized Brigade, they were saying about the clashes with the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of that brigade. Now we are moving further, and currently we're in Kremenaya front line, so I believe that probably we can complete with this territory. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, for probably the 5th time in a row, reported that as a result of fierce fightings exactly on Liman front line, the Russians managed to repel attack of 42nd Mechanized Brigade. So basically, this is another confirmation that Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 42nd Mechanized Brigade closer to the combat line, and they're trying to use these strategical reserves exactly on Liman front line. I'll remind you that the forces of 42nd Mechanized Brigade on original deployment map you can find in the vicinity of Kremenchuk together with 43rd Mechanized Brigade. Interesting updates are coming from Artyomovsk front line. The Western deployment map shows the deployment of 40 separate rifle battalion in the vicinity of Orekho-Vasilievka. This is some kind of special unit, special forces, and currently I don't understand the purpose, but probably the main reason of redeployment of this brigade in this area just to reinforce and to increase the power and might of Ukrainian forces exactly in the vicinity of on the west north of Dubovo-Vasilievka and on the west from Paraskovievka. Interesting updates are coming also from Donetsk front line. The Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 142nd Infantry Brigade in the vicinity of Pervomaiskaya, and this brigade recently was located in the vicinity of Kiev, in the vicinity of Desna. As you know, there is a very powerful, very important military base where the Ukrainians, under the control of Western instructors, are having some exercises, military exercises and so on. So this 142nd Reserve Rifle Brigade was redeployed in the vicinity of Donetsk. So let's move this brigade to Donetsk area. So this is our Donetsk, and to be more precise, this brigade was redeployed in the vicinity of Pervomaiska. So basically, as I understand, this is exactly the fresh forces that were attacking the Russians during the previous week. And basically, that's it about the changes on the front line. And as you can see, according to this information, according to this piece of information, we see that currently the Ukrainians have created another two very powerful areas with a very powerful attack fist. The first one is in the vicinity of Gulai Polya. I will show you. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So as you can see, based on information we have, the Ukrainians have accumulated on this small bridgehead the forces of 67th Mechanized Brigade, 33rd Mechanized Brigade, 102nd Defense Brigade, 23rd Mechanized Brigade, and 3rd Tank Brigades. So as you can see, this is a very powerful armored fist in this area, and since the beginning of the Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation, we haven't received any updates from Gulai Polya frontline about any activities. So basically we see that maybe under the cover of fierce fightings, fierce fightings in Orekho and Petykhatki, the Ukrainians have accumulated a very powerful fist, and basically we can expect a very powerful attack in direction of Pologi and in direction of Kamyanka, exactly from this direction. So basically the Ukrainians may try to attack in this direction using those redeployed forces. And another powerful attack fist the Ukrainians have accumulated in the vicinity of Kremenaya Forest. During the previous weeks, the Ukrainians have redeployed the 67th Mechanized Brigade, the Ukrainians have redeployed 63rd Mechanized Brigade, 42nd Mechanized Brigade, there were 95th Brigade, 25th Brigade, 58th, a lot of special units. Furthermore, according to the deployment map, the Ukrainians have adjusted the positions of 40th Artillery Brigade, and currently this brigade is located on the south of Seversky Donetsk River. Probably they understand that it's very dangerous to keep this brigade to the north area, and they need this brigade as close as possible to logistics centers like Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and to support the Ukrainians' attacks in this area as well. During this video, we'll come back to Liman area one more time, because the sources are saying that either the Russians and the Ukrainians launched a very powerful attacks on each other exactly on this front line. So let's discuss the situation on the ground step by step. And first we're going to start with Petykhatki area. Currently, as we discussed in the previous video, the settlement Petykhatki itself is located in the gray zone. Nobody controls this settlement, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians. But today the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of this operational Battle of Petykhatki, confirmed that Ukrainians, as a result of fierce fightings and storming operation, managed to develop their bridgehead further to the west, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians managed to develop this bridgehead, and furthermore the Ukrainians managed to establish fire control over the roads that connects Zherebyanki and Petykhatki, over the road that connects Zherebyanki and Lugovo, and according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians managed to establish fire control over the road that connects Lugovo and Lisnaya, this small settlement on the southwest from the settlement by the name of Lugovo. So all these three roads are under Ukrainian control and Ukrainian fire. And most of the mappers are saying that Ukrainians have developed their bridgehead to the west and basically established control over this forest line. So this is the current situation in the vicinity of Lobkova and Petykhatki. The Russians still controls Zhiribyanka, Lugova. Basically, they controls the first defense line. Petykhatki is in the gray zone, but the Ukrainians almost every single day may make more and more attempts to establish control with the settlement by sending a small platoons or even squads in direction of these settlements. But for now, all those attacks were repelled by the Russians using the heavy artillery fire and so on. When talking about this territory, about this bridgehead, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they made massive missile attack all over the Zaporozhye region. Especially they were attacking Zaporozhye, the settlement, the capital of that region, and the Russians reported they destroyed at least 2 ammo depots of 128th and 65th brigades in the vicinity of Zaporozhye. Furthermore, the Russian military expert Ryber published his analysis about the bombing and shelling of this settlement, and mainly the Russians were attacking the northern industrial area where the Ukrainians were trying to keep and to hide their Western armored vehicles. Now we are moving further and we are getting to the Orekhov bridgehead. As we discussed, the Ukrainians have moved 118th Brigade as close as possible to the combat line. Basically, they have replaced the forces of 65th Mechanized Brigade, and I expect that within the next few days the Ukrainians will use these fresh forces to penetrate and to attack Rabotina for another time on this direction, and of course using the forces of 47th Brigade and 3rd Operational Brigade Spartan, the Ukrainians will continue trying to advance in direction of Novofedorovka, Novopokrovka and Verbova. The Russians published a very interesting video, and according to the Russians, they're saying that this is the first confirmation of destroy of armored vehicle, Striker armored vehicle of United States production. They're saying that on this video we can see this. If you ask me, it's very difficult to recognize Striker on this video, but the Russians are saying so. Probably we can believe them and we can trust them. Now we are moving further to Guliai-Polye. As we discussed, there are almost no clashes in this area, just the Russians reported they managed to discover and to destroy Ukrainian commandos platoons somewhere in the vicinity between Dorozhnyanka, Marfapol and Reshetilovskaya. And furthermore, we are moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Russians, according to the Ministry of Defense, managed to repel the Ukrainians' attacks in the vicinity of Переютное, Rabotina, in the fields between Novodonetsk, Kermenchik, Urozhaine and Staromlinovka. Furthermore, the Russians bomb and attack the Ukrainians' positions in Livadne, in Novopol, and the Russians attack Ukrainians' positions in the fields between Velika Novoselovka and Kermenchik. Furthermore, the Russians published more videos of armored vehicles that were captured during the Battle of Novodonetsk. That was a very heavy battle between Russian army and Ukrainian army, and as a result of that attack, that battle, I'll remind you, the Russians managed to capture and destroy around 50 units, 50 pieces of Ukrainian armored vehicles. Basically, on this video you were able to see Max Pro. On another video, the Russians published the destroyed T-64 in the vicinity of the same settlement. As you can see, there was a very powerful feast created by the Ukrainians that was completely destroyed under very heavy fightings with the Russian army. Furthermore, the Russians published later a lot of videos of Ukrainian prisoners of war who were captured on this bridgehead, and all of them were saying that that was a suicide operation from the Ukrainian side and that they had a lot of losses. They didn't have any connections, any communications between the squads, brigades and platoons on the battlefields. Now we are moving further, and we are going to, before we move further, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the bridgehead between Vremivka tactical bridgehead to Petykhatki, the Ukrainians lost 260 soldiers, 25 armored vehicles, including 9 tanks and 5 artillery systems. So as you can see, the losses were very heavy. Now we are moving to the south of Marinka, where the Russians continue advancing between in triangle between Novomikhailov, Novomikhailovka, Konstantinovka and Pobeda. The Russians published another video how they were attacking the Ukrainian trenches using the Shahed mobile, fully loaded with a significant number of explosion. This is very interesting tactics, and the Ukrainians still haven't found any solution how to stop the Russians, how to stop those armored vehicles. Basically, the Russians first stand the armored vehicles, and as soon as the armored vehicles get the Ukrainian positions, they basically just detonate these vehicles, and after that we see a very heavy explosion. And after such explosion, it's not a very big problem for the Russian forces to capture this or that fortifications. Furthermore, the Russian military expert confirmed for the second or third time in a row that this territory was captured by the Russians, and basically according to the Russian military experts and the information we can find in the Russian source, currently the Russian army are trying to advance to the west in this direction, and basically the Russians are trying to establish control as the first phase of the battle for South Marinka area over this small bridgehead, over this small square. Currently the Russians also shown another video how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions somewhere in trenches and forest lines, somewhere in South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area, and probably this video was made somewhere in the vicinity of Marinka, and as you can see, the Russians continue bombing and shelling, and currently we see that this is some kind of artillery preparation before another attack from the Russian side. So as we can see, according to information we have from the open source, the Russians currently are focused on this white white cloud. The next step from the Russian side is going to be to move to the south in this area and to establish control over this second white cloud. By this they will be able to get as close as possible to Novomikhailivka, and then they will be able to establish physical control over the supply road that goes to the settlement, and basically they will be able to encircle this settlement or to establish operational encirclement. And the third phase of that operation, as I understand, is going to be to establish control over these forest lines, including the settlement by the name of Pobeda, and using this significant bridgehead, the Russians will be able to encircle Mikhailovka, and of course to push the progress in Marinka to the final end and to capture this settlement once and for all. The Ukrainians made few counteroffensives in the vicinity of Marinka, but all those attacks were repelled by the Russians. But from the other side, the Ukrainians also published a very interesting video somewhere on the Russians, on the territory that is under Russian control. As you can see, there was a very heavy explosion, and the sources are saying that the Russians probably were sending some kind of reserves or something like this, and on the way to positions, the Ukrainians managed to destroy, or that machine got onto minefields and was destroyed. When talking about North Donetsk area, one more time I'll remind you that Ukrainians have redeployed the 142nd Reserve Rifle Brigade from Kyiv, from training center Desna. Those forces were trained by the Western officers, Western instructors. The Ukrainians took a decision to reinforce this territory, this bridgehead, and basically the purpose of the Ukrainians is either to not to allow the Russians to develop their offensive operation, and from the other side to make another attempt to return the lost positions in the vicinity between Nivolska and Vadiana and Pesky and Oputne bridgehead. From the other side, the Russians published another video how they were bombing and shelling Avdiivka. On this video, the Russians were using the TOS flamethrower systems, and currently the sources are saying that the Russians have upgraded and modernized their missiles and the shells for TOS flamethrower systems. Currently, they became more powerful, more dangerous, and more vital. On this video you see the results of those attacks. Probably nothing is able to survive after such a shelling and bombing. The explosions are very heavy, as you can see, and the Russians continue preparation in the vicinity of Avdiivka before the beginning of the final ground operation. Currently we can see just the artillery operation, air forces operation, and we expect the beginning of the ground operation in the vicinity of Avdiivka and inside of Avdiivka as well. Also, the Russians reported that they managed to repel the Ukrainian attack from Nova Kalinova in direction of Krasnogorovka. There was small recall in combat from the Ukrainian side, nothing more. When talking about Artyomovsk, we haven't received any updates. The only thing that we can discuss is that the Ukrainians have redeployed the 4Ts separate rifle battalion in the vicinity of Dubovo-Vasilivka for now with unknown purposes. And finally, we are getting to Siversk-Liman front lines. Yesterday we discussed that the Russians, according to some Russian sources, have launched a series and a few waves of offensive operation in Kremenaya forest in direction of Tarskoye, in direction of Yampolovka. From the other side, we see that Ukrainians during the previous weeks managed to redeploy a lot of force in this area as well. And currently there are 66 mechanized brigade, 25th, 42nd, 95th, 1st Special Purpose Brigade, 63rd Brigade, 3 Artillery Brigade like 26th, 45th, 40th. There is a 67th Brigade, 58th, 81st, 51st, 10th Mountain Assault. There is a Donbas Battalion. There are Donbas battalions. So there are a lot of forces from the Ukrainian side. And to tell the truth, I can't tell you who exactly is going to attack, because both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, have a lot of forces to attack. And both sides, and currently it's unknown. It's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are going to attack or they're going to defend themselves, or the Ukrainians have redeployed all these forces to attack, or they redeploy them to stop the Russians and not to allow them to penetrate this defense area, this defense belt, and to get to Liman. Because if the Russians can penetrate these forces, these forests, they will be able to get to Liman, and the battle for Slaviansk will start from the beginning, and everything will start from the beginning, including the battle for Izium. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to repel the Ukrainians' attacks in direction of Dibrova from Kremenaya forest and all over the combat line in Kremenaya forest. From the other side, the Russians reported that they were attacking mainly from the north to the south, and as a result of those attacks they managed to capture more bridgeheads and more checkpoints. So very difficult. Maybe there is like face-to-face combat between two armies, I don't know, but basically, as I understand, this area Liman front line is going to become the second meat grinder after probably Orekhov and Vremyevka tactical bridgehead battles. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. So this is the second day in a row when we see a very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side. They're not so heavy as on Donetsk or as on South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area, but the thing is that, for example, Donetsk, when talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost during the previous 24 hours 220 soldiers and 10 armored vehicles, and on South Donetsk 260 armored soldiers, and on Liman front line just 100 soldiers. But you need to understand that the length of Liman front line is twice as less in comparison with Donetsk and in comparison with Zaporozhye and South Donetsk front line. So basically, the level of losses when we are trying to turn these numbers in accordance with the length of the front line is the same or even more in comparison with those two front lines. So very heavy, fierce fightings, and it's very difficult to understand who exactly attacks and who exactly is in defense state. Now we're moving to the Kupiansk front line. The Russians report they destroyed the ammo depot of 3rd Tank Brigade in the vicinity of Dvorechna without any changes on the ground. If you take a look at deployment map, you won't be able to find the 3rd Tank Brigade because this brigade recently was redeployed in the vicinity of Vremyevka tactical bridgehead. So as I understand, the Ukrainians haven't managed to redeploy every single ammo depot of that brigade, and probably the Russians just attacking those ammo depots that were left by that brigade on this bridgehead. That's it about the situation on the ground. Just a few seconds more. Today we got another video of Dnipro River. As you can see, currently it's a desert, and for now the ground it's very dry weather, and currently the situation can give the Ukrainians and the Russians opportunity to start attacks from both sides. And another interesting update today we received from the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kirill Budanov. If you remember, we discussed many times that probably this person was killed, but today the Ukrainian authorities published like online video where he was talking about the situation with Zaporozhye power plant and so on. So basically the Ukrainians confirmed and showed the evidence that everything is fine fine with this person. So based on that, we can move Budanov back from Berlin, from Germany, because the latest update we got that as a result of like a missile attack, this person was wounded and he was redeployed to Germany, and now we got evidence here that everything is fine, so that's why we are getting him back to the territory of Ukraine. And the same situation with Zaluzhny. Recently the Ukrainians published the video and photo with him, so as I understand, nothing have happened either with Zaluzhny and with Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.